Coming up.
This finance minister and deputy leader 2 years ago promised that the debt to GDP ratio would never go up. They appeared to have shoeboxed or shoehorned in keeping the debt to GDP ratio in their projections, but there's a number of projections that I think are a little bit optimistic.
I thought, just to correct the record from the misinformation that the Liberal MP started off his round with, I would just read for the record the letter that you received from Environment Canada on May 14th that said, the data the department is providing contains unpublished information. As such, I request you to ensure that this information is used for your office's internal purposes only.
I just have one quick last question. I just wanted to confirm one more time that given even this report, given all the information we have today, including whatever error, which I think was corrected by you rightfully, Mr. Giroux, that at the end of the day, that a majority of households will be worse off when you factor in the economic and fiscal impacts of the carbon tax scam.
If you just take the fiscal impact, it's 8 out of 10 Canadians are better. And they can quote me and they can put that on there. But the reality is, the truth of that is that once you include the economic impact, 6 out of 10 Canadians are worse off. Is that not correct, Mr. Drew?
When we look at that $25 billion of this secret data that this government refused to release, does that carbon tax was that factored in when that $25 billion impact on the economy was released to you?
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Government operations and estimates, or as the PBO calls it, the mighty OGGO.
The government's supplementary estimates A for 2024-25 outline an additional $12.7 billion in budgetary authorities. Voted authorities, which require approval by Parliament, total $11.2 billion. Statutory authorities, for which the government already has Parliament's approval to spend through other legislation, are forecast to increase by a total of $1.5 billion. The forecasted increase in statutory authorities reflects updated forecasts from Budget 2024 and is primarily attributable to two items: an increase of $1.9 billion in public debt costs, primarily due to higher projected interest rates and higher borrowing requirements, and a decrease of $533 million in elderly benefits due to revisions to the projected number of beneficiaries. And a decrease of $533 million in elderly benefits due to revisions to the projected number of beneficiaries.
And we're surprised at your appearance here today, considering the way you've been gagged. As you can see, we've brought in the best from my caucus here in an effort to question our House Leader, Mr. Scheer, as well as our finance critic, Mr. Jazraj Halan, as well as Mr. Lawrence. So with that, Mr. McCauley, I'll pass the time over to Mr. Lawrence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, for coming, and thank you for your brief statement. We appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about debt and the continued spending of this government. Of course, this finance minister and deputy leader 2 years ago promised that the debt to GDP ratio would never go up. They appeared to have shoeboxed or shoehorned in keeping the debt to GDP ratio in their projections, but there's a number of projections that I think are a little bit optimistic, including getting an additional $7 billion from the increase in the capital gains, increase there. I was just wondering if I could get your comments on that, Mr. Drew.
Well, it's something that we have not estimated independently yet. I mean, the revenue-raising capacity of the increase in the inclusion rate of the capital gains. However, it's quite possible that the revenue raised in the first year of the measure will indeed reach that $6.9 billion, especially considering that the measure was announced 2 months in advance. So it leaves time for some types of transactions to be materialized before the higher inclusion rate kicks in. It's not the case for real estate transactions, of course, but for stocks, for example, it's quite possible that the number of transactions spikes in anticipation of that increase, What that means is that the revenue of the outer years, so year 2 and forward, and that's less likely, or it's not certain that it will be at that level, given the number of transactions that are likely to have been advanced in time.
So, if I hear you correctly, Mr. Giroux, what you're saying is that if, in fact, the transactions go through or are particularly robust in this year, or in other words, the fire sale, that the latter years, the next 2 or 3 years, we could actually see revenue less than expected. Is that what you're saying, or?
It's quite possible, and that's why the profile, as laid out in the budget, has that bump in the first year, followed by significantly less revenues in the outer years, in anticipation of a higher number of transactions between budget day and June 25th, when the higher inclusion rate kicks in.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the capital gains, the revenue expected. The former Liberal finance ministers have actually contemplated that when they brought down the capital gains exemption from 75 to 50, Mr. Manley, that they actually saw an increase in revenue. And isn't it possible that even though the rate goes up, the revenue may stay flat or even decline because of the dynamics of the economy?
It's possible, and we refer to that phenomenon as elasticities of tax measures. So if in anticipation of lower taxes, there could be investment decisions that are changed, and more investment flowing into Canada, depending on the exact profile of these investors. But it's not a phenomenon that is very well understood or easily predictable, given the volatile nature of capital gains tax revenues.
Thank you for that. And just a little bit further on that as well, a number of venture capitalists and other investment organizations have even gone so far as to call the capital gains tax a tax on innovation and a tax on investment. Could you see, and I know it's the scope of it might be difficult to predict, but is it reasonable to think that it might have a dampening impact on investment in Canada by increasing the inclusion rate of capital gains exemption?
It's quite possible. However, there are a few things happening at the same time. There's the lifetime capital gains exemption on small businesses that is being increased. There's also a new incentive for entrepreneurs in certain sectors that is being introduced at the same time as the inclusion rate is going up. So there are many things at play. So it's quite possible that the innovation aspect will not be affected for smaller businesses, but also negatively affected for most, if not all, of the other sectors, those that trigger capital gains inclusion or capital gains higher than the thresholds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drew.
I noticed that some of my colleagues have questioned you about having a gag order, and that's how you were introduced by the opposition. And as you know, you're an independent member of the House. You are there as a trusted independent officer to direct all of us and provide information where necessary. And Mr. Giroux, are you being gagged by the government of Canada?
C'est une question qui m'a été posée.
This is a question that was asked of me in another committee, and I answered in my second language. And then this led to probably a misunderstanding. So the government is not muzzling me. I was referring to some data that was provided to my office, and that the government or the Department of Environment and Climate Change had explicitly said that I could not disclose, but the government has not muzzled me in the publication of a report or in the content of any of the reports that I've published.
Thanks very much. I thought just to correct the record from the misinformation that the Liberal MP started off his round with, I would just read for the record the letter that you received from Environment Canada on May 14th that said, the data the department is providing contains unpublished information. As such, I request you to ensure that this information is used for your office's internal purposes only and is not published or further distributed. Liberals also had many, many days where they could have published it themselves, and it was only until the opposition put a production order on notice in the House of Commons that they ended up publishing it themselves. So first question I have, is this normal? Do you often receive requests from government departments not to release or publish information that they provide to you?
It happens, especially when it's confidential data related to third-party information, for example, commercially sensitive data or national security issues. So it happens when we dealt with the EV subsidies for plants for batteries for electric vehicles, or national defense issues. But when it is purely an internal analysis and internal data, that's not that frequent.
It's not that frequent. Okay, so the Liberals have kind of ranked this right up there with national security, keeping the costs hidden from Canadians on the cost of the carbon tax. Have you had a chance to look at what the Environment Department has published on the website? Chris?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we've reviewed the files that were provided. I believe it was on June 13th, and they are the same files. There are some additional files that were unrelated that were also provided, but they were the files we received back in May.
Okay, so they have put everything on that you saw originally when this letter was written to you.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so just wanted to talk a little bit. First of all, I believe the total hit to the economy thanks to the carbon tax is $25 billion by, is it 2030? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. But that's not adjusted for inflation, is it?
Go ahead.
Yes, that is the impact on real GDP. So it's been adjusted for inflation.
Okay, so that 25 would include the inflation. Okay, can you talk a little bit about what that would mean per household? Like, have you $25 billion on the global economy? What on a per household basis? What does that work out to?
We haven't prepared estimates related to the per household impact. For us, the GDP data that was provided was useful to compare to our previous results, but also more important and used in our actual analysis is the impact on, let's say, investment income and labor income in the economy. So these would be the channels through which households would be impacted. And those impacts are somewhat larger than the GDP impact, but our plan was to, as part of our updated analysis of the distributional impact of carbon pricing, we wanted to incorporate the results that Environment and Climate Change Canada provided us, to provide a sort of a second set of results if parliamentarians and outside organizations had concerns with our model, we use their model. Sorry.
So sorry, I only just got told I only have about a minute left. So just very quickly, do you still stand by your conclusion that the majority of Canadians are worse off with the carbon tax when you factor in all those economic costs, lost wages, lost investment opportunities, those types of impacts?
As a result of the fuel charge and the carbon pricing regime at large. So it's including the output-based pricing system.
Okay. Well, one more quick question. Sometimes the Liberals criticize your reports because they say you haven't factored in the cost of climate change. But my understanding is that is because with or without the carbon tax, Canada will experience consequences from climate change. Is that correct? In other words, that the carbon tax doesn't magically wave away the impacts that Canada, it doesn't create a bubble around Canada at all. So can you just confirm that under both scenarios, with or without a carbon tax, the cost of climate change would still be felt by Canadians?
I'm not a climate scientist, but based on the scientific consensus, it needs concerted global action for climate change to stop getting worse. So Canada acting alone is not sufficient. So yes, that's as much of a confirmation as I can give.
So even with the carbon tax, Canadians will continue to pay the cost of climate change?
Unless everybody else reduces their emissions significantly.
I would say that at this committee and in Parliament generally, we deal with a lot of counterfactual points. And so I would ask you, do you think that your office did enough to ensure the public was made aware of the misinformation?
Notre responsabilité est d'informer les parlementaires.
Our responsibility is to inform parliamentarians, and we did that by putting a note on our website. And also, we tried We've received a lot of questions from parliamentarians and also questions from some ministers' cabinet. So we had the impression that many people who were interested in the climate issue had noticed our note on the website. And since the first day of publication, could we have done more? Yes. But did we have the impression that we had done enough, given the nature of the questions? We had the, it seems, erroneous perception that many people were aware of this.
Mr. Halan, please, for 5.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Drew, it's been 9 years under this government. Canadian workers today get about 58 cents of investment for every dollar American workers get. And this is even before the capital gains tax hike takes place. Do you think that this capital gains tax hike will negatively impact what businesses invest in their workers?
It's quite possible, given that the inclusion rate will increase for corporations, but it's also introduced at the same time as the lifetime capital gains exemption is increasing for small business owners, and at the same time that there is a new exemption for certain types of entrepreneurs. However, for larger businesses, there is no such exemption, and it's quite possible, knowing that the behavior of businesses is dependent on the overall tax rates they pay, it's quite possible that the amount of investment will be lower, other things being equal.
Yeah, and exactly. So, just for you to confirm that what that could mean is a higher capital gains tax could mean less investment on workers' paychecks, on investing in equipment, growing the company, or even hiring more workers, which we know Canada's in a productivity crisis. Can you confirm that these are some of the knock-on effects of this?
That would be what you would normally expect, as I said, other things being equal, but that may not happen equally in all sectors, especially sectors where there are other tax incentives.
Absolutely. The government admits that there's 300,000 businesses, most of them small businesses, that would be affected by this capital gains tax hike. That means there's hundreds of thousands of businesses, and that's millions of workers. Canada is in a productivity crisis, as per the Bank of Canada. They said this is a break glass emergency crisis right now. Could this also impact the job creators and those businesses, making productivity even worse?
A number of groups have mentioned that it will impede or not restrict, but it will lower investment that would otherwise take place, and de facto also reduce employment. Again, other things being equal.
So that would, and in other words, reduce productivity.
It's not something that is favorable to increasing productivity. That's
exactly. Okay. We've seen over the last 9 years of this government, because of their policies, we've seen $460 billion of investment flow to the U.S. or outflow out to the U.S. We've seen U.S. GDP per person has increased 50%, whereas in Canada, it's only grown 4.7% in the same given time. Do you think investors are less likely to invest in Canadian workers? And this capital gains tax hike would or could have a knock-on effect of having U.S. workers getting a higher paycheck due to investment leaving Canada?
Well, as a general rule, if you tax something, there is less of it. So if you tax investment, other things being equal, again, it's likely, and evidence suggests or literature suggests, that there should be slightly less of it if you tax something.
Okay, fair enough. I want to continue on with the conversation my last colleague had about the carbon tax scam. When the report was released, it was admitted that about $25 billion is what the hit to the economy would be because of this carbon tax scam. And it took Conservatives pushing on this for this report to be released by the department. Have you done an analysis, or is there an estimate on what impact this would put on Canadian on government revenues at all?
In our March 2022 and 2023 reports, we provided estimates of the potential budgetary impact related to carbon pricing. And
Does
essentially,
that include this $25 billion hit to the economy?
it would include our estimate of the impact on real GDP. So our estimate at that time, I don't have the dollar figure, but it was 1.3% in terms of the reduction in real GDP. That's compared to the 0.9% reduction.
And what does that mean? Does that mean it's because businesses would invest less in their own businesses and workers would have less?
It's essentially that reflects the economic impact of the distortionary tax of related or the distortion created from carbon pricing. So
Okay.
households having to
Less.
shift.
I just have one quick last question. I just wanted to confirm one more time that given even this report, given all the information we have today, including whatever error, which I think was corrected by you rightfully, Mr. Giroux, that at the end of the day, that a majority of households will be worse off when you factor in the economic and fiscal impacts of the carbon tax scam.
We know it's true if you factor the fuel charge and the output-based pricing system. We are in the process of updating our analysis to isolate the impact of the fuel charge.
But that conclusion will not change, in your opinion.
Thank you, gentlemen.
If Mr. Pierre Poilievre eliminates the Canada carbon rebate, how many households will be worse off in my community, let's say in Windsor, Essex, based on that analysis?
Well, it depends what policy action is precisely being taken.
Let's say the carbon rebate is eliminated, which is what the Conservatives and Mr. Poilievre want to do. How many families in my community, based on your analysis, will be worse off?
I don't know exactly the profile of people in your community, so we've done.
The average, the median household income is $70,000, $75,000 in my community. Based on that information, how many would be worse off if the carbon rebate is eliminated?
That would depend on the exact profile of people in your community.
I'm sure it does, but on average.
On average, you could reverse engineering the numbers we have been saying.
Okay, and what would that be, sir?
Ça pourrait être autour de 8.
It could be around 8 out of 10, but it depends on the specific profile.
Thank you very much. And I must admit, I'm a little exhausted, as I would assume you're so even more, Minister Giroux, about litigating the carbon tax. So, like, I'm not here to play games. I'm just gonna say this like it is. So, if you just take the fiscal impact, it's 8 out of 10 Canadians are better, and they can quote me and they can put that on there. But the reality is, the truth of that is that once you include the economic impact, 6 out of 10 Canadians are worse off. Is that not correct, Mr. Giroux?
When we include the economic impact of the fuel charge and the output-based pricing system, it's true that the majority of households are worse off, and we are in the process of updating our analysis to try to isolate the fuel charge, the impact of the fuel charge itself.
Yeah. So when economic and fiscal impacts are combined, as you said, the majority of Canadians are worse off. That's correct. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Giroux. And one last thing on the carbon tax, and then I promise I'll move forward. But the government's own report appears to validate your conclusion. Is that correct?
That is our understanding, because they arrived at an estimate of a negative 0.9%, rounded to 1% of GDP when including the fuel charge and the output-based pricing system, where we had 1.3% in 2030. So that's in the ballpark, and that's very close for that type of analysis.
Yeah, and my apologies. I'm just reminded by my colleague that I need to get you actually on the record, even though I got a nod. So I'm just going to repeat my previous question. As you said on page 4 of your report, when you include both fiscal and economic impacts of the carbon tax, of the fuel charge, the majority of Canadians are worse off.
Our report also included the output-based pricing system, so it's not just the fuel charge, it's the fuel charge and the output-based pricing system. And considering the economic impacts and the fiscal impacts of both measures, yes, the majority of households are worse off.
Thank you very much for that. How much time do I have left? Perfect. I just want to talk, as my initial round, we talked a little bit about the budget and some of the projections. We talked about the capital gains. Another area that I have concern about the projection is with respect to the government's prediction of saving billions of dollars by reducing the size of the civil service. The civil service has grown since 2015 by over 40%, and now they're telling us that they will begin a plan by saving $1.3 billion in next year's budget by reducing the civil service by attrition. Do you share any of the concerns? Because when I talk to department officials, they never have a plan for reducing the size of their footprint.
I share these concerns because the budget indicates that they'll be reducing the number of FTEs in the public service by 5,000 over 4 years by attrition. But the budget also has a number of measures that will are reasonably expected to require more public servants. So it will either mean that there will be more reductions in certain sectors to make room for this increase in some areas while also reducing the aggregate size by 5,000, or there will not be any reduction at all.
Yeah, and so we potentially could see greater losses in the civil service, and the other negative outcome that is perhaps likely is the fact that instead of the civil service being reduced in size, they may actually grow. And if that were to happen, if the dollars that are forecasted for reduction, that would put the government off of its fiscal anchor of debt to GDP ratio, would it not?
It would probably absent reductions in other areas to compensate for that. And I'd add that based on historical results where departmental plans indicated a reduction a reduction to come in their overall number of employees, we have seen instead increases. So that's on good. That's what I'm basing my assessment.
So either the government's going to miss its fiscal anchors, or the civil service is going to have even more cuts than are predicted.
It's either cuts to the public
maybe.
service or reductions in other areas if the government is to meet its fiscal targets.
Thank you very much. I'll get there. Mr. Chair.
There was some excellent news in the budget, this budget, in terms of that particular rebate and extending it. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also the impact that we're seeing in terms of the adoption rates for electric vehicles in Canada.
So yes, there was some additional money in the budget for supplementing the program. I think it is $605 million in these supplementary estimates to make the subsidies for zero emission vehicles available to more people to meet demand, essentially. And that's a result of the fact that we have seen new zero emission vehicle registrations go from less than 20,000 in 2017 and reach almost 185,000 last year, which is expected to be even higher this year as a result of more widespread adoption of zero emission vehicles in Canada.
And I read your report where you stated that it's increased from 1% of auto sales to 10%. That is fantastic news to hear. Would you say that that federal rebate, $5,000, that applies to the Chrysler Pacifica, do you believe that that has had an impact in helping to boost sales?
I think one can safely assume that it had a very positive impact, considering that price is also one factor, an important factor in deciding which vehicle to buy or not.
My question is just a clarification. Today's date, when we have all of your analysis done, this secret data that the government was hiding for $25 billion impact on the climate, on the economy, but because of conservatives' pressure, they finally released that it was a $25 billion hit to the Canadian economy and workers at the end of the day. I just wanted to get one clear answer that given all the data, all the secret information that has been finally released, your final conclusion, according to you, still stands, which your final conclusion was that given all the fiscal and economic impacts of the carbon tax scam, a majority of Canadian households are worse off. Can I just get you to confirm that one more time?
The fuel charge and the output-based pricing system, when both are included, yes, that still stands. But
Perfect.
that's it.
Thank you very much. There's another portion to this that the Liberals and the NDP refuse to talk about, and that's the clean fuel regulation, or what it's better known as is carbon tax 2. We know that this will cost, on average, about $573 more. When we look at that $25 billion of this secret data that this government refused to release, does that carbon tax 2, was that factored in when that $25 billion impact on the economy was released to you?
Thank you for the question. The analysis or the estimates that we received from Environment and Climate Change Canada reflected only the impact of carbon pricing in Canada and did not include the economic impact of the clean fuel regulations.
Okay, so in those, just following up on that, does that mean that it would only make things more expensive for Canadians on top of your analysis?
We prepared a report in in 2023, I think it was May 2023, using the estimates that that Environment and Climate Change Canada had provided us in terms of the economic impact of the clean fuel regulations.
Just a clear answer, because I have a limited amount of time. Carbon tax 2 or clean fuel standard will only make it more expensive, correct?
According to the estimates that we received, they indicated a negative economic impact and a negative impact on households' income.
Okay, so it makes Canadians poorer. And there is no rebate on this carbon tax 2, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So what we can conclude is that when you factor in carbon tax scam 1 and 2, the overall analysis is that a majority of households in Canada will be worse off, correct?
Unfortunately, we haven't prepared that analysis. We've only looked at the separate impacts of carbon pricing and the clean fuel regulations.
Fair enough, but if the conclusion for carbon tax 1 is a majority of Canadians will be worse off, does that not mean that if there's a negative impact with carbon tax 2, that it would lean towards a negative impact overall? Would that be correct?
It's likely correct. However, the precise
and this applies
impact
to every province, correct? Carbon tax 2 without a rebate,
the clean
including
fuel
Quebec
regulations
and
yes,
BC.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that there can be some interactions with the provincial regulatory standards as well. So it may not be.
But the overall
fully
impact would be negative. Yeah. Can I just get a clear answer on that?
Sorry, I don't recall. I believe in our report we showed what the
Mr. Giroux, you said yes. I just wanted to confirm that overall.
It's very likely yes.
It's very likely yes. Thank you very much. How much time do I have left? 40 seconds. Going back to the capital gains tax hike, one would concur once you talk to Canadians and businesses, especially small businesses, we hear a lot about how this is punishing success. Like I'll give an example of a immigrant who came here, worked their way up to, went from driving a truck, making a paycheck, to eventually buying a truck of his own and creating, success for himself, for his kids and their kids and their kids. In their words, this is punishing their success. Is that accurate for a small business like his, where if he wanted to give his business to the kids or sell it off for their kids' future, he would get less in return?
Very brief answer, please.
Well, it depends on whether it's above or below the capital gains lifetime capital gains exemption, or the inclusion rate of 50% for the first $250,000. So one would have to look at the specific of that situation.
Just a last quick question.
I'm afraid
Are
we
there
don't
any
have
other
time, Mr.
knock-on
Galland.
effects?